So I'm going to start my sermon with a little testimony as well. Well, you know what? I got this sermon from like a couple years ago here in the congregation. I developed it more, so you would see whatever. Probably someone already saw that. So this is me, not the Chinese guy, another. So this is me. So I heard the gospel from the Hong Kong Christians in 1994. That's not 1994. It's 10 years later. From this guy. This guy was sharing gospel with me, and then I graduated from the Christian school where I met Oksana in Ukraine. We got married there, and we got our first son was born there. And then we moved to the Russian Far East on the border with China, and did the ministry among the Chinese for 25 years there. So that's me, not the Chinese guy again, but this is another guy here, standing in the Chinese uniform. In 2018, we went to Israel, and we were so far away from Jewish roots or Jewish understanding or whatever, so we came to Israel, and I hate this. I don't like it. They talk about the Jews, how they're smart, how they do that and that and that. I was tired of it. I mean, like, I want to go home. And we were so unprepared. So we made our schedule for these 7 days that we have, or 5 days. And then the last day before our flight, for the shopping time, we do the sightseeing all the days. And then the last day before we leave home, we left it for the shopping time. And guess what day of the week it was? Shabbat. Yes. And we were like surprised. Why everything is closed? What are you doing? I mean, like, so yeah, that was funny. But when I get back home, our Baptist church in Russia, they decided to have a Passover Seder in the church this year, just to see how Jesus lead his disciples and so on. And they told me, well, you were in Israel, you will lead it. I said, I have no idea how to do that, or learn it. Okay, so we have a couple weeks. So when I start to learn about the Passover Seder. That was our Passover Seder in our church in Russia, my first Passover Seder. And while I was doing that research, suddenly I realized that we just missed that part in the church. We never talk about that. I graduated from the Christian school with my bachelor's degree in theology, and we never even mentioned that. And I was like, but we're missing a lot. Now I read the gospel and understand when Judah left, I understand why we have a couple cups in the Gospel of Luke instead of one that we have in the church, And I was like, well, and more of that, all the traditions of the Passover setting pointing to Jesus, and I was like, oh, that's changed my mind, okay? So for a year, I never talked to anyone, but I was secret follower of Yeshua now, not Jesus, Yeshua, like Jewish Messiah. So I was studying the Torah with the commentaries, I was reading it. I thought that I'm only one in the world. I mean, I never heard of any other guys like doing the same thing. Only after that, after a year, I realized that there's some other guys who believe in the same way as I do. So it's called Messianic. But I was looking for someone who can help me. You remember that Aquila, Priscilla, we talked about them, Priscilla, when we studied Book of Acts and the Book of Romans. So I was thinking, well, this is Aquila and Priscilla, they found Apollos and helped him, Aquila and Priscilla, explain to Apollos the way of God more accurately. I want to have someone who could do that to me, and God gave it to me. This guy with the Israel flag, and his wife stand beside him. They were a Jew in the Baptist church in another town. I know that they're a Jew. I knew that they're a Jew. I came to them and asked them, what should I read? Now I want to know more about Judaism or Jewish culture. Just point me. So they directed me to what should I read, what kind of books, what kind of commentaries, and so on and so on. Okay, so, and then from that day, from 2018, every year I was leading the Passover Seder, and until now. And I was preaching Jewish Messiah in our Baptist church for 5 years, where I was one of the pastors. And they saw think about me like a Baptist rabbi, and everywhere we go, they give us this role to play in whatever they do, like drama in the church about Jesus or something. They dress me as the Simeon or as the something. You know, here is Oksana and I in the Russian church in the Bethlehem synagogue. And I'm like a rabbi, and she's a rabbinite, and my wife. So anyway, I was known as the Baptist rabbi on that time. But there is some difficult questions to raise in my mind. When I was reading the book of Acts, for example, what denominations were these people baptized into? 3,000 were baptized. Who are there? I know there's John the Baptist, right? So the Baptist church was started there, right? Because I was a Baptist, all right? So, okay, where did they go to worship to? I mean, like, what? House, temple, synagogue, all right? So what Bible did they read? Because there is no Gospels yet, there is no epistles yet, there is no book of Revelation yet. I mean, like, what should they read? Because I'm reading the New Testament now, right? And what did they read? Okay, so, and there is even special court for Gentiles in the temple. They were even worse than women. I mean, like, there is a woman closer to the temple than the Gentiles. It's like, okay, it's like, what's going on? So I was reading this, but beside of those theoretical questions or philosophical questions, I have some practical questions. When I realized that Christianity has these Jewish roots and Yeshua is a Jew, that was my first lesson when I became a Christian. On my first lessons of the Bible, I realized that Jesus is not Russian. That he was a Jew. Okay. All the apostles may be Russians because they have the Russian names. And actually, I can notice that the first question that you have in your notes, it says Pavel, which is Russian variation of Paul. When I typing, so sometimes I even still think in Russian. So anyway, so the practical questions: do I need to be circumcised to become part of the God's people now? Well, I want to be like Jesus, right? He was circumcised. All the apostles were circumcised. Should I? That's my question first. Okay, second, do I need to fulfill all the rules of the modern Judaism? Well, if that was the only denomination by time of the first apostles, it's still running, right? Shall I follow all the regulations and rules of that denomination now? Okay, that was a question. Do I need to observe all the Jewish holidays? I called them Jewish by that time. All the Jewish holidays? Yeah, we know that it's the Lord's holidays, but not all of them, of course, like there is some Jewish as also traditional. Okay, so I don't know the answer to all of the questions until now, right? I'm working on it. But suddenly the New Testament has become, to me, a very practical book. Before, in the church, when I read the New Testament, it's something about Jews somewhere, sometimes, in the centuries. Who cares about Corinthians church? They're all the pagans, idol worshippers. It's not our church. It's not me. Nothing is related to me from these books, right? From all the epistles. But now, it became very practical. It's not like spiritual principles that I was doing for 25 years or so. I was reading it and just want to get some principle out of it, like spiritual. Not really, it's not practical, it's not to me, it's really not for me. But now, it's very practical. I am not a Jew, joined to the Jews in Messiah, okay? And now, what should I do? Okay? And the question today, very practical question today, should a man cover his head while he is praying? One day I was entering into the church and I still have my hat on. I was just entering and one of the brothers stopped me and says, you should remove your hat. I say, why? We don't do it here. Okay. So, and my grandma, I always love to have my head on. My grandma has always told me, "Are you Muslim? Take it away." It's like, okay. She was Russian Orthodox. So anyway, and this is from the chapter that we're going to read today, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. That was our homework. We have to read a few chapters from the New Testament as well. So when you see this chapter 11 verse 4, it says, "Every man praying and prophesying with his head covered dishonor his head." Or in verse 7 it says, "For surely a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God." Why do we cover? And that's a Christian, okay? So we know about the Corinthians church. We already started reading the Corinthians before, right? We know that that was the church that started mostly even from the Gentiles. There was only one, the head of the synagogue, who believed in Corinth by that time when Paul was preaching. But the rest of the guys were there Gentiles, right? But not Apostle Paul. Not him. He was not a Gentile. He was a Jew, right? I found this interesting picture on the internet, the Jewish Apostle Paul. Okay, all the Jews, when they pray, they have the talit on their heads. They cover it with the talit, right? Until now. Even the Christian artists, they would not write or, draw a picture of Yeshua or Jesus in a synagogue without covering his head. They knew the tradition, right? They keep it, right? Then why does Paul, as a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, suddenly declare that a man who covers his head is dishonoring his head? That was my question. Let's read it and figure it out what he's talking about.
"Be imitators of me, just as I am of Messiah. Now I praise you because you remember me in everything, and hold firm to the traditions, just as I passed them on to you."
Okay, thank you. So, in those first two verses of this chapter, my question is, what is Paul going to talk about in his teaching now? Traditions, right? When we were studying book of Romans, we said that there is a problem between, leadership, between the Romans, the Gentiles believers, and the Jewish believers who started the church, then left for a few years because of the Claudius emperor. He get all the Jews out of Rome, including Aquila and Priscilla. Then they all came back one day, and now is the problem, because for a few years here was sitting where the Gentile who was teaching, and most of the Gentiles were worshiping. Now the bunch of the Jews come back to the church, and now the question is why you are chosen, why you are leading the church, why we should follow your teachings. And then Paul was dealing with these questions in the book of Romans. But the Corinthian church is totally different. It's started from the beginning with the Gentiles. And they don't have that questions, but there has another questions of the questions of how many of Jewish traditions we should follow. It's like in our congregation, right? We have a couple Jews only, and then we have bunch of Gentiles who come and want to follow the way, and then we are now thinking about the same way. How much of the Jewish traditions shall we apply in our congregation? That's the book of Corinthians. So Paul was already taught them before, and he says, "I praise you because you remember me in everything and hold firm to what? To traditions that I passed on to you." All right, but there's a few things that they did not follow. Now he's going to talk about that. 1 Corinthians 11, 3-4. Please.
But I want you to know that the head of every man is Messiah, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Messiah is God. Every man praying or prophesying with his head covered dishonors his head.
Okay, this is our question here, right? So I underlined the word dishonors. And I started to think about that. What does it actually mean? The New Testament was written in Greek. The Matthew was written in Hebrew. So in Greek, right? So then I get into the Old Testament translation in Greek language, which is called Septuagint. So I went there, I tried to find this word that Paul used for dishonors. It has number 26:17. and it reads as kataishuno. So I find this word in Septuagint in Psalms 119:31, and says, I cling to your testimonies, O Lord. Do not put me to shame. So this word actually means shame, not dishonor. Okay, it deals with the shame. So I start looking what is the Hebrew words for that replaced by the word kataisuno, and it's bush or bush. Okay, and it means the shame as well. So when it's in Jeremiah,
their nobles have set their laths for water. They went to the cisterns and found no water. They returned with their vessels empty. They were ashamed and confounded and covered their heads.
you see that? What happens here? So your boss sending you to do some task, you couldn't do it. So you're coming back, and when you feel sorry, you're ashamed that you didn't make what the Lord asked you to do, or what the boss asked you to do, so you what? You cover your head. That was their tradition. They are coming back and they covered their heads. You see that in the Jewish culture, when a person is ashamed, he covers his head. Not the covering the head is make this dishonor act, right? So it's when you shame before the higher power, like your boss, okay, then you cover your head, right? So you feel, oh, well, I'm sorry. It's like humility, right? You want to be humble, so that's why you cover yourself. That's the Jewish tradition. It started here. You see that in the prophets. Then we go to 2 Samuel 15:30.
So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up.
That was the time when David's son was against him, and he has to leave Jerusalem in shame. So he was walking on the street, on the valley. He covered his head because of this, what happens to him. He humbled himself. The same as his men, right? They all covered their heads in the same way, right? So this is like a picture. It's not David, but it shows, like a person humbled, cover heads, and just walking on the street. Should man cover his head when he is praying? Let's continue read verse 4.
Every man praying or prophesying with his head covered dishonors his head.
So Paul is not condemning man here, but simply give an example of common practice in the Jewish community. Okay, he says like every man who covers himself, he is in shame, he is humbling himself. It's not like he says, if you cover, you're doing the wrong thing. It says like when you see the person, a man is covering, it means something. It means that he is humble because of the higher authority, right? So that's what Paul tried to say here, right? And in verse 7 it says, for surely a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, right? So the Paul's idea is our position in the Messiah does not require us to cover, right? And man is not obligated to cover his head. Okay, he might not be covered, but if man recognizes the higher authority over him and humbles himself before it, in the Jewish culture, it is expressed by covering the head. So when I was thinking about that, I watched one short video on YouTube, and they talk about covering, and then someone asked the Jewish rabbi, says, when it is in the Torah, when you should cover, right? How this tradition started, and he says, well, that is not in the Torah, that's not commandment, but there was a rabbi who always was having something on his head, like covering his head, and someone asked him, why do you do that? He says, well, it reminds me that above me there is someone. So it became very popular by his time, and people start wearing it first in the synagogues, in the worship place, and then in a daily life, okay? So, man is not obligated to cover, But if he's covering himself, it does not dishonor him, right? It shows humility before the Creator, right? So Apostle Paul wrote all of these letters to the Gentiles communities for one purpose: to help them to integrate into the culture of the Jewish communities, right? So it is in the Jewish communities, it is in tradition, right? So unfortunately, even in the time when Apostle Paul was there, he wrote his letters, they already misinterpret his ideas, right? So that's what Peter says in his letters.
Just as our dearly loved brother Paul also wrote to you with the wisdom given to him, he speaks about these matters in all of his letters. Some things in them are hard to understand, which the ignorant and unstable twist, as they also do with the rest of the scriptures, to their own destruction.
So even in Paul's time, people didn't understand what he was trying to say and twist it, right? And even today in the church, it's considered improper for men to cover their heads, right? So that's how they understood this chapter from Apostle Paul.
I was just thinking, priests are praying
Yes.
a lot.
Yes,
And in the tabernacle and temple, they were required to have turbans.
yes, we'll get to this
Okay.
idea that all the traditions that they have some base in the Torah, right? Like priest, he always should have a kiddar on his head, the special covering. So he cannot minister in the temple without it. So it's there. You can learn from your priests. They are covering their heads. Okay. So what about women? All right. So should the woman cover her head during the prayer? That's the question. Let's read it.
Let every woman praying or prophesying with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for it is one and the same as having been shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, let her cut off her hair. But if it is shameful for women to have her hair cut off or to be shaved, let her cover her head.
Okay, so that's what Paul says, right? And then let's put pay attention to the few words. First is uncovered, and then be shaved. Remember what is Paul teaching here, right? In chapter 11, he's talking about traditions. That's not the commandments, right? He's talking about Jewish traditions, but what we see in the scripture about that. Numbers chapter 5 verse 18. I put New King James Version because in the Tree of Life translation it's translated differently a little bit, but this is a proper understanding of that text.
Then a priest shall stand the woman before the Lord, uncover the woman's head, and put the offering for remembering in her hands, which is a grain offering of jealousy. And the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that brings the curse.
We just read this chapter in our portion, right? That's why I asked us to read it. So the first thing that priest is doing to the woman that is kind of thinking that husband think that she is not following, not keeping the holy of the marriage, so he uncovers the woman's head. So that's the time when he just wants to dishonor her, or it's a judgment. He just uncover her head and says, well, let's see, who are you? That is the first thing that the woman came to him covered, right? Okay, so let's see, what about shaving? The shaving woman's head serves as the punishment for their behavior. So, and it's also in Isaiah chapter 3. There's a few quotes, I just give you one. Isaiah 3, 16, 17, anyone?
Moreover, Adonai says, since the daughters of Zion are proud and walk with their outstretched necks and seductive eyes, walking and mincing as they go, making a jingling with their feet, therefore Adon will spite with the scab of the forehead of the daughters of Zion, and I will expose their scarlet parts.
Secret
I'm
parts.
sorry.
Yeah, you see that, so God says that I will shave you, basically, and that everyone will see your secret parts. He was you'll be naked before everyone. So that's kind of shameful things to be shaved. That's what Paul is using this as an argument. So, and also in Jewish tradition, when the woman covering her head is also signified submission to her husband. All right? So that's what Paul says in next verses 8 to 10.
For man is not from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for the woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels.
So in traditional Baptist church in Russia, we observe that tradition. And that's very useful, you know. When you go to the congregation, especially when they have 3 sons, we need, you know, get rid of them, so they have to be married. So we get into the church, and married sisters, they all cover their heads. Unmarried, they don't cover their heads. So then we come into the church and we would say, hey, okay, this girl is not covered, maybe she is free, okay, why wouldn't you go and talk to her? So this is the picture of the typical Russian Baptist. Can you guess who is not married here? Yeah, this is very easy, right? Yeah, this is a very good tradition. I like that in the church. When you go there, yeah, you can choose, the one who is not married. Okay, so, but even in the Jewish tradition and Judaism, they're still covering, right? And they try to make it nice and very fancy. I like that too. And of course, some of them are starting to have a wig instead of covering. You know, like they don't like to be covered, so they created the idea of wearing the wig, because I'm not exposing my own hair, right? But I'm wearing a wig, so it's kind of count like a covering. Yeah, in our Russian Baptist churches, they also do some kind of stuff like that. They don't want to cover fully, they just make it fold and fold and fold until it's just a little line here, so covering head. So I'm covering, okay, stay away from me. So, so this is funny stuff, but yeah, if we look back to the Torah again, do we have any examples when the covering heads is showing the submission to her husband? And I found it in when Rebecca, you know, like the Abraham's server, he went to find the wife for his Abraham's son Isaac. So he brought Rebecca, and she acted in the same way. Genesis 24:65.
Then she said to the servant, "Who is that man there who is walking in the field? To meet us?" The servant said, "He is my master." So she took the veil and covered herself.
And you know the rest of the chapter, right? He invited her into the tent, and they became husband and wife. So she already submit herself to the husband. When she saw him, she covered, and she greeted the new husband. Okay, but in our text here in 1 Corinthians 11:8-10, it says, it's a symbol of authority on her head because of whom?
The angel.
The angels. What does it mean? What the angels has to do with that? Do you have any ideas? Hey, the microphone, please. Yes.
My understanding of angels is that it doesn't just mean angels, it could also mean messenger, or it could mean a message.
Okay.
And so it could mean because of the messages God gives to us. That's my speculation.
Okay. Well, actually, there's lots of things about the angels here, and some of the says that. Well, remember in Genesis when the sons of God, they mixed with the daughters of man, and the giants guys and was born, and some of them say that, well, the ladies there, they were uncovered, and their beautiful hairs attract the angels, and they start intersection with them. Well, this is one of the explanation, and so on and so on. But since we are studying Book of Revelation on Tuesday, and we get into the time on chapter 2 and 3 when it says to the angel of the Messiah coming into Ephesus, right? You know, why should I write to angel? God couldn't tell him directly. Okay, so I have to write to someone, and I think we figured out when we were studying that the angel is the messengers, right? and it was the messengers of the congregations. They probably came, 7 messengers from 7 congregations. They all came in one place when they received the letter from John. And everyone has a portion for this community because John wants to teach them, gives them some advice, or God through John. So anyway, so we became to conclusion that the angels in the book of Revelation is not the angels with the wings or from heaven. That's the messengers from the church. So I don't think that angels care about your covering, or they just don't know, are you married or not? Why should they know? Well, there were lots of questions about that. But if we will think about the angels here in Apostles' Paul writings as the messengers from other messianic communities, that makes sense. It's like a Jew believing in Yeshua, coming visiting Corinth, right? Gentiles community. He gets in, and for him it's important that you are following the traditions. He comes and sees you covering, and it's like for him, for these messengers from other congregations, from Jerusalem. The messenger from Jerusalem wants to see the church or the congregation in Corinth. So he came and he sees you covering, and you are following traditions. That's good. Because remember the purpose of Paul, of all of his letters, to make the Gentiles congregations more or less acceptable by the Jewish community. So that's what he's talking here about, tradition, right? So when you see that picture on your notes, and it's that what I placed here. So who is coming to the congregation and needs to see the covering? Not the angel on that side of the picture, but the messenger from Jerusalem, for example, Jerusalem community. So he comes in, and for him it's important that you have this covering. I don't think angels care. Yeah. But, okay, so here Paul says that then he continue to talk about this topic. So first of all, the whole this part of chapter 11 is actually for sisters, okay? He's not talking about men. He brings men example. He says, like, if your men are covering, then you should cover even more because of such and such and such things. And then he's mentioning even the nature of things around them.
Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Doesn't the natural order of things teach you? If a man has long hair, it is a disgrace for him. But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair was given to her as a covering.
So he's not talking about the Jewish traditions now. I mean, like, he's not even talking about the Torah examples. He says, well, look around you. Like even in your culture, if this man has the girly hair, that's not the good thing, right? But the lady with the long hair, that's beautiful. That's like when you look to her, it's like a covering. It looks like covering. Okay, so that's what the argument of Paul here. Okay, so little conclusion: in the Jewish culture, a man should choose whether he is cover his head or not. Okay, that was not very strict. Married women, they should be covered all the time. That was. I give you a little quote from Talmud, and it's a tractate Nedarim, and they discuss another things. Like who is the dark heads? They were like it was a quote. They were says this is dark heads is doing that and that. Who is this dark heads? So this is the quote from Mishnah.
The Mishnah states, but he is permitted to derive benefit from women and from children because only men are called, those with dark heads. The Gemara explains what is the reason for this. Men sometimes cover their heads and sometimes uncover their heads. They can be called dark heads since for the most part they have dark hair, which is often uncovered. But women's heads are always covered, and children's heads are always uncovered. And the expression dark heads is referring to men whose hair is sometimes seen.
So, okay, so that was a topic. Aside of the topic, that they're discussing. They say that, okay, so this should be man. Why? Because sometimes they uncover their heads. You can see their dark hair, like all the Jews, this kind of nation, they have dark hair, or red, like David, they say. Okay, so anyway, but a woman, you cannot say that they have a dark hair or whatever, because they're always covering. You cannot see them uncovered. Children, they always uncover it, that's fine. But when the Gemara is teaching, so it's teaching about man. So that's the tradition. So man can be covered or not covered, that's freedom in that. So Paul writes to the congregation and the Gentile congregation about this Jewish tradition. So he is a head covering in one of those traditions. And it's important for the messengers of Jewish Messianic congregations, when they come into your congregation, to see that you follow the tradition, right? And then, very important, at the end of this topic, he says, but if anyone intends to be contentious, right, we have no such custom, nor do the God's communities. Okay, if you want to fight with me after my sermon, okay, there is no such a custom. All right, there is not that tradition. I don't follow this tradition. Okay, don't argue with me. That's Paul says. Okay, so anyway, so let's talk about application. So for men, it's complete freedom, right? So you can cover or not cover, or however, nowadays in the Jewish communities, the covering of the one's head in the synagogue is not an option. So when you come to the synagogue, they will give you covering, right? You have to cover your head. So that's not an option now. So if you are wanted to attend the synagogue, be ready that you need to cover your head. In our congregation, however, everyone is decide for himself, and there is no such tradition, like established tradition in our mandatory tradition. Those who do covering our heads is doing voluntarily. Okay, so you can see that I never stop anyone there and says, please cover your head, then you can come in. Okay, so in Judaism, the tradition of the covering is still maintained for the religious women, like both inside and outside of the synagogue. They always cover it. If you plan to visit synagogue, sisters, be ready for the covering. In our congregation, however, we do not insist that women should cover their heads. But if you think about the Jewish visitors, right? For the visitors from Jewish community, this might be a complete shock when they see you uncovered, and we kind of claim to be a house of God or a place when we worship God. They would say, hey, what's going on? If we want to serve as the witness to the Jewish congregations around us, you might considering to cover your head for them, for these angels, for the visitors, right? So, there is a couple sisters who is covering their heads when they're coming, and they're doing voluntarily. I never force them. I always praise them, but never force. Okay, I love what they're doing. But may the Lord help us to find the right answers, on the practical questions for our lives in the Torah, and not only in the Torah, also in the Brit Chadashah in the New Testament. Amen?
Amen.